After discovering Kyle's presence at Carolyn's house the night of her murder, we see a parent hiding potential evidence, which, speaking of evidence, we get some damning evidence that turns Rusty's case on its head. We also meet a new character who may have connections to Bunny Davis' case. As it is time for us to discuss and break down episode 4 titled The Burden, spoilers ahead. We open with Rusty and Barbara coming into Kyle's room as Rusty asks him about the picture. Now Kyle starts the conversation off by lying, which wasn't too shocking to me considering who his father is. As they say, the apple doesn't fall too far from the tree, as he claims he just happened to be driving by that night. Now you'll notice that Rusty is towing the line and questioning Kyle as both a father but also as a prosecutor questioning someone in court. As we see Barbara trying to play the good cop in the situation by letting Kyle know that the police also have this photo, as we see Rusty just wants to know the truth. As Kyle tells his dad,
I guess I wanted to get a sense if they're there.
Now Kyle tells them that he overheard his parents arguing about Carolyn one night and decided to see who Carolyn was for himself. Meanwhile, Jalen is listening to the conversation on the other side of the wall. As it appears that Kyle and Rusty's makeup and hugging from last week's episode when Kyle questioned his dad if he would take a plea agreement has passed, as we see Kyle just wants to talk to his mom about the situation, leaving Rusty to leave in his room. We cut to seeing Rusty taking a walk outside as we get a flashback of him having a conversation with Carolyn, who's practicing her case about Bunny Davis with him. Now back home, Barbara fills Rusty in on the conversation she just had with Kyle, as he did admit to going over Carolyn's house a few times and he only saw his dad go in once. As Barbara suggests to Rusty that Kyle actually go to therapy, which he's against, as we see her calling him out for interrogating their own son. But one of the more interesting parts of this conversation is what Rusty says to Barbara.
You played a part in it too. And you will, at some point, need to take some responsibility.
Now again, we find out what he meant by that in this episode, but it got me thinking, did Barbara ever confront Carolyn at some point of this affair? Did she maybe do something incriminating towards her, leaving Rusty to cover up for his own wife? Again, none of this was confirmed in this episode, but I think that's something we should keep an eye out for later on for the rest of this season. As Rusty tells Raymond about the photos taken by Michael of Kyle, we see Raymond asking Rusty one of the most important questions.
Sure he didn't kill her.
You know, you're not funny. That's not.
I've really enjoyed how Raymond's been pretty honest with Rusty during this situation, not only with the case but also with his family, as we see Rusty is afraid that Barb might leave him after the recent argument, and we see Raymond telling him and calling him out for betraying his family, as we see Raymond simplifies what Rusty thinks will be a complex situation involving this affair as he's called to in court, but we see in the jury's eyes, as Raymond points out, it's pretty simple. As we see Rusty pushing back on what Raymond's saying him having lack of guilt and shame, as Raymond tells him the difference between the two.
Guilt is more about owning and feeling the pain that you cause others. I don't doubt that you feel shame.
We learn that one of the staff members, Eugenia, was aware of the affair and didn't tell HR, as Tommy wants her to take a stand as a witness. As we see Tommy meeting with Michael and his dad to confirm information that was previously discussed. Now within this conversation, Michael tells Tommy that his mother once told him that she was actually afraid of Rusty. As Michael says that he discussed this over lunch with his mom and details more of what she said about the man from work. Now part of me thinks that Michael might have been lying, but then again, Rusty himself admitted to being a stalker towards Carolyn, so it's not completely hard to believe what Michael is saying in this moment. Now back with Barbara, she pays a visit to her new bartender friend Clifton. As we watch them flirt over his tattoos as they share a drink together, now we talked about her potentially going down this path of having an affair in last week's breakdown, but I want to have a conversation with you all in the comments below. Is Barbara currently in the wrong in your personal opinion? Now, mind you, I don't think she's done anything wrong quite yet, but some might disagree with them flirting and her continuously going back to the bar, but it appears that her intent is to engage in physical activities with Clifton. Now, again, do you think she's wrong? Do you think she's just looking for someone to talk to and confide in? Or do you think this will lead down the path of her having an affair? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. As we cut over to Detective Rodriguez, who tells Rusty that she's got a hit on the second DNA from the Bunny Davis case. As we find out, the DNA belongs to an individual by the name of Brian Ratter, who Rusty and her pay a visit to. As we see that he has a wife and kid, as Rodriguez takes the lead in this conversation and tells him that they're just inquiring about some recent break-ins in the neighborhood, as we see Rusty's watching his responses, but eventually he steps in. Both Brian and Rusty give looks at each other. Brian tells Rusty that he recognizes him, as he eventually gets to the point that he's not going to give them information and tells them to leave. Now, did Brian recognize Rusty because he's seen his face on the news or the newspaper, obviously being a suspect to a murder, or did he remember him from the Bunny Davis case? Either way, there's definitely something very suspicious about this new character by the name of Brian. Now, we cut to seeing Rusty, who's continuously having nightmares about Carolyn, but this time around, I couldn't decipher this as just being another nightmare/dream, or if what we saw of him picking up the poker and Carolyn looking fearful of him actually happened. As I gotta admit, when we have these moments of Rusty having these flashbacks and us not knowing if it's a dream, if it's a nightmare, or if this actually happened, it's really keeping me on suspense and not knowing what's real and what's not. Now, after awaking from this nightmare, we see Rusty finds Barbara in the garage cleaning off Kyle's bike. As we see Barbara telling Rusty that she doesn't want to take any chances, as she says,
"Man, and her doormat, bring her over the..."
Come on. Come on.
I think you forget our son is black.
Now, I was actually curious if the race of Rusty kids will ever be mentioned in the show, as we have this conversation being had between Barbara and Rusty, as we now know that Kyle is a part of the evidence, as she reminds Rusty that he has a black son, which to me is her implying that the justice system isn't always as favorable to black men. Now, I want to backtrack and don't want to look over the fact that Barbara was caught cleaning off her son's bike that might have evidence on it, which makes me wonder if this is the first time she's ever covered for someone in her family, maybe even herself. Going back to episode 1, she told Rusty that she would be willing to do anything to protect her family. As we get a brief scene of seeing Kyle is now attending therapy, and he's actually sharing the same therapist with his mom and his dad, but he doesn't want to talk to her. We see the therapist telling Barbara that they need to redraw some lines because she's having sessions with Rusty, Barbara, and now Kyle, and it should just be one member per therapist, especially now that they have a case being involved in the situation. As the therapist shares her thoughts on the situation, as she brings up to Barbara that even though she might want to stay in this marriage and forgive Rusty, eventually these feelings will resurface and make Barbara unhappy and build a level of anger, as she ultimately suggests that she seeks another therapist. But after this conversation, my question now is, has Barbara already taken action and fueled and channeled her frustration and anger towards Carolyn? Did she ever confront her? And more importantly, like I said back in episode 1, was Barbara there the night of Carolyn's murder? Cut to Nico warning Tommy against the idea of relying on hostile witnesses like Eugenia to make his case, as Tommy tells Nico that he believes Eugenia might have been in love with Rusty and he wants to tell her to toe the line. Now, correct me if I'm wrong in the comments below, but was Tommy just implying to Nico that Eugenia might have been jealous of the relationship between Rusty and Carolyn? Now, to take that idea a step further, and if this is true what Tommy just said, implying that there was some jealousy involved, should we now have her on our radar as far as the suspect is concerned? I mean, she would have access to the Bunny Davis case file and know how she was found and did the same thing to Carolyn in a form of jealousy. Did she kill her? As Tommy continues to tell Nico that he'll have hard evidence, which he gets by the end of this episode, as he learns about a meeting taking place soon with Raymond, thinking that he may have a plea deal to offer them. We see Maya questioning Rusty about the night of Carolyn's murder and learn some very important information. We see how frustrated Rusty got when texting Carolyn and not getting a response from her, as he went to a bar alone that night and got drunk. As we see that Carolyn finally messages him back and he immediately leaves the bar and goes to her, but my question is this the same bar that Clifton works at? Now, are we going to maybe learn that Clifton and Rusty have a history together? But also, let's take a look at these messages. Yeah, it's pretty clear that Rusty was a prime candidate for being a stalker. Now, like I said, we learned some important information in this conversation as we find out that she responded to his message at 9:24 p.m. as he arrived to her house at 9:49 p.m. As we watch Rusty recalling the moment he arrived to her house, we see very different versions of their interactions. One of them showed them kissing each other once he arrived. Another one shows them holding each other and saying that they miss one another. We see one where she's standoffish and him apologizing for his behavior, to one of them showing how things got worse between them. Now, Rusty does admit that they did get into an argument at some point about them getting back together. Now, we find out that he was at her house for almost an hour before arriving home at 11 p.m. As Maya points out that argument must have been crazy for it to go on for at least an hour. My question is, did that actually happen? As he claims that they kissed goodbye and he felt that that was her giving him hope, but also her way of having him leave in good spirits as he left. As Rusty puts it,
I hope it just turned into cruelty. She knew what she was doing. She was fucking cruel.
It's funny that Rusty is now calling her cruel, because in last week's episode, we remember that he said that she was one of the most kindest people he's ever met, but now she's cruel. Which is it, Rusty? Was she cruel? Was she kind? Was she a mixture of both? But my question is, do you all believe his story? Me personally, I don't. Number one, he was clearly under the influence and probably didn't remember everything that happened at night, but also he's been proven to be a liar before. It wouldn't surprise me if we learned that Rusty may have hit her that night and left her maybe unconscious, but she was alive and maybe someone came in to actually kill her. Could it have been Barbara? Could it have been Brian? Maybe Kyle or even Michael. As we see, Maya shares her opinion with Raymond on the case on Rusty's recent story, as they both agree.
There's no way we let that man anywhere near the witness chair.
Agreed.
Now we see that Rusty can't find any dirt on Brian, as we cut between Brian actually doing his own research on Rusty. As Rusty is hard pressed on believing that Brian was indeed in the room with both Bunny and Liam that night that she died. Now we end the episode with the medical doctor giving Tommy something that pleases him, as this appears to be the hard evidence that he's been promising. Meanwhile, Barbara cuts a phone call short with her husband Rusty because she's at the bar again with Clifton, as we see him giving her his personal number if she ever wants to talk, just in case he's not at work, as we cut to Rusty and Barbara having sex. Something just tells me that both these characters were thinking about two different people while they were engaging with one another, Carolyn for Rusty and Clifton for Barbara. As we see Raymond getting ready for the meeting between Tommy and Nico, but before that he talks to Eugenia, who assures him that she won't be testifying against Rusty. Now again, is she not testifying against Rusty because she secretly is in love with him? As Raymond sits down with the two and he flat out tells them that their case is messy and lousy, as Raymond brings up the lack of physical evidence being found on Rusty. As Raymond's really feeling himself in this scene as he's taunting Tommy, who hasn't said a word at this point. Now, I don't remember seeing a conversation between Raymond and Rusty agreeing on this deal, but we see Raymond presents this deal, which is they'll take the obstruction charge, which will give Rusty 3 years, because it's better than walking away with nothing for the newly elected district attorney. But Tommy and Nico's got a surprise for Raymond, which is they show him what the medical doctor gave Tommy. As we watch, Tommy smiles and Raymond's in shock. Now, after sharing a passionate moment together, we see Barbara questions if he shared the same passion with Carolyn. Now, Rusty responds, and we also find out in this moment that Rusty and her were far apart at this time of the affair and weren't on talking terms. Now, to go back to the conversation being had between Rusty and Carolyn regarding her not taking responsibility for his affair, it is brought up that that responsibility was simply them drifting apart. As Barbara questions if their recent passionate moment was just proof if there's something still there between them, we see Rusty gets a call from Raymond, as Rusty finds out that his skin was found under Carolyn's fingernails. Now, Rusty claims that this is impossible. He says that this has been planted by the doctor and Tommy. Meanwhile, there's someone knocking and banging and screaming out the door, and it's Brian. You can see the chaos and feel the tension going on in this scene as we watch Rusty opens the door and snaps and begins to beat up Brian, as his wife and daughter see this dark side and anger of Rusty. So the first thing that comes to mind after seeing that explosive scene is Rusty lying about the DNA and Carolyn scratching him? Did this happen during that hour-long conversation they had? Did they end up having a passionate moment, and did she find herself digging her fingernails into him? I say that because we know that they got aggressive during those moments together, as we saw in episode 1, and maybe he didn't even notice it because that's just what they do. Or, now I'm no DNA expert, but wouldn't Rusty share the same DNA as Kyle? Did Carolyn and Kyle get into a physical encounter leaving her dead? And if not Kyle, what about his daughter Jalen? Now, the second thing that comes to mind after this last moment of the episode, how did Brian find his house? And was he drunk and pissed off about Rusty coming to his house and seeking some type of payback? Now, what's going to happen next? Now, Rusty can claim that this was self-defense, but then, of course, it can come into question, how did these two know each other? And if that is brought up, Detective Rodriguez's side mission will come into question, and maybe her job will be on the line. Now, the question I have for you all is, who was lying and telling the truth in this episode? Was Michael honest about the situation with his mother, claiming that she was afraid of Rusty? Now, personally, I think so. What about Kyle? Was he being truthful about how many times he visited Carolyn's house? I personally think that there's some truth there, but I also feel like he's keeping his own secrets as well. What about Brian? Now, he didn't get directly asked about Bunny, but he definitely knows something. But after this episode, we're going to add Brian to one of our main suspects. And last but not least, do you all trust Rusty about the last time he was with Carolyn? Overall, I thought this was a huge improvement from last week's episode, in the sense that we got a lot more information about the past interactions and relationships between the characters, but of course we got more details regarding the case. To me, this episode did a really good job of making you feel like there's truth in the lies being told, and how characters like Barbara would be willing to do anything to protect her own. Thank you all for watching this breakdown. If you're enjoying these weekly discussions, make sure to hit the like button, share this video to anyone and everyone you know that's interested in this show, but also share your thoughts about this episode episode, your theories, your predictions of what you all hope to see in the weeks ahead, and also consider sticking around by subscribing to the channel. You all are awesome, stay safe, and I'll catch you all on the next breakdown.
Yeah.